Welcome to a special interview. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblar House here with author Roger Thomas. Roger, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Roger is the author of one of our exciting new books Tumblar House has published, Under the Watchful Sky, the first book in what we hope is a 4-volume series.
That's right. So
Yep.
far.
So far. So today we're going to talk a little bit about this book, Under the Watchful Sky. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself, Roger.
Well, I live here in Michigan. I've been married for 37 years to my lovely wife, Ellen. We raised 6 children, and they're off now raising their own families. And at last count, we have 16 grandchildren we can hold and 2 more on the way. So that's
Wow.
a grandchild count for you.
That you're very blessed.
Indeed.
Do you read a lot? Do you have literary influences? If so, what are they?
Oh, tremendous. Reading has been something since I was a child. I've read an awful lot of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, but other authors as well. P.G. Wodehouse, for example, is one of my favorites. Rudyard Kipling. Oh, Wodehouse is fun.
I love he's underrated. Not a lot of people know Wodehouse.
Oh, no. He's unfortunately, I'm seeing a bit of a resurgence, but he's definitely worth it. Light reading, lots of fun. Excellent writer. Evelyn Waugh himself said nobody could write like Wodehouse. So on the principle that if you want to learn to write well, you must read well, then, include Wodehouse, but also others, Mark Twain, a lot of classic authors.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So big reader. I love reading.
How did you decide to start writing the series Under the Watchful Sky? Like, what prompted that?
Oh, well, it's kind of hard to say what prompts you to write a story like this. I mean, my pro-life involvement has sparked many of my plots, and one of them, Under Watchful Sky, is concern for the elderly and what will be happening in our culture as resources get scarcer and more people get older, and the question of, well, what are you going to do all these resource-draining old people kicking around? So that's an issue, and somehow I just thought about it, and these characters came to life in my imagination, and I started writing them down.
Yeah, your book, it really deals, everyone's aware of the culture of death, but so far the focus has been toward infanticide, abortion, but there's, as your book shows, there's the other end of the spectrum, not just infants, but old people now too. I think you said in a previous interview that there's a sort of utilitarian view of humanity in terms to sort of value humanity in terms of on economic terms. Is that true?
That's right. Well, you see this more and more as people start to argue for the value of people based on their economic productivity, how much they can produce versus how much they consume, and so forth. And so there's a valuation of humans as an economic unit, which of course goes flat against the gospel's idea that every human's made in the image of God and is valued for that.
Yeah. Okay. So another theme in the book is I wouldn't say it's explicit, but it's implicit, is a relationship between technology and faith. There are some people who sort of live in a holistic fashion. They're off the grid, so to speak. They live off the earth. They do subsistence farming. But it seems like that's true to life now. There's more and more Catholics I've noticed are living in this way, both as a protection against spiritual dangers and to sort of continue to be bound to rhythms of God as compared to rhythms of man. What are your thoughts on this area?
Well, I mean, it's obviously we're in a highly technological society. It's very, very centered on the world and the works of men and what we have to say about ourselves. So there's very urbanized environments. We've seen them before. And the more plugged in we are to that, the more we are concerned about, what men think and how they act and what they're doing, and the less we're concerned about the things of God. There's a reason why. It's not like there's a panacea. There's no magic formula, no special place you can move. to, touch the kingdom of God. But there is something to be said for being more in tune with the rhythm of nature, with the day, the light and the dark that the Lord established, and the nature of the seas and the skies. And I, for instance, I just love folk like farmers and sailors, people who are attuned to the natural order of things, and realize that life isn't something we completely control. It's something we have to accept. Some things as given, like the weather or the waves or whatever it might be. Whereas the more we immerse ourselves in the world of men, I get up in the morning and I drive to an office building and I work there all day long and I drive home. And, we can have thunderstorms come through and I won't even know it because I'm buried in my work. And, I could live in such a way that I'd never have to walk under the open sky, get in my car inside a garage and my feet never touch the ground. So the point is that I think the more we're in tune with the natural order, the easier it is for us to tune out the noise of human civilization and the works of men and listen to the voice of God.
Yeah, I could talk about this subject for hours. You touched on the one thing, the light and dark. That's a huge... Our understanding of light and dark, I feel, is hugely deficient because with electricity, we're not really subject to darkness anymore. We can stay up till 4 a.m. We can create our own rhythm of life, and we are not subject to God's rhythms anymore. And darkness doesn't really scare us the way it used to. When night comes, like in medieval times and such, it's a scary time outside, darkness, and we don't really have that anymore. So I feel we don't really value light anymore. Like, because I was meditating on this on the home altar, where I was meditating on the concept of Jesus is the light of the world, and it occurred to me because before that I hadn't really thought much of that. Light of the world, that's compared to light and dark, but it's so much deeper. I think we have a deficient understanding of Jesus as the light of the world because light comes so cheap and so easy.
That's right.
It's so often. And we get so much and we take so much for granted. The other thing, you mentioned sailors and farmers. Farmers are dependent on good harvests. And sailors are dependent on the weather. And these are things that are beyond our control. It's a humbling experience. Like, you can do everything, right, and still you are subject to, the powers that be. And we don't have that anymore. We don't have these sources of humility. Would you agree?
I think that's a big factor. We have an illusion about how much we can control. It was about 15 years ago now. There was a huge blackout in the eastern part of the United States. You made the news. You may remember it.
Yeah.
But the several states were blacked out, and there we really got an experience of light and darkness because, now, fortunately, it was summer, so it wasn't like really, really dark at night, and people's furnaces weren't out. Or it didn't matter that they weren't out. But that was an interesting experience to be in the middle of that for about 4 days because there really was no light. And you're right, we don't have an appreciation for what it means for there to be no light. Because in an urban environment, you might turn out the lights in your house, but you walk outside and there's all this ambient light from all the other sources. To truly get to a place where there is darkness, you're right, we really don't understand it. And therefore, when Jesus said things like, well, when you're walking in sin, you're walking, it loses a lot of the impact because we don't really know, we don't know darkness. We know kind of, it's darker, but we don't know dead darkness. And that's what he's talking about.
Yeah. I had kind of an experience like that. It was in the dead heat of summer. It was triple digits over here. And we had like a rolling blackout for several days. And I found myself saying thinking to myself, I can't live like this. And then immediately when I said that, I immediately pictured all of the saints in heaven face palming at me because they didn't have electricity. I mean, it's just normal to them. They didn't have indoor
Yep.
plumbing. They didn't have machines that condition the air. They didn't have fast food. They didn't have
Yep.
devices to communicate wirelessly across the world.
Yep.
And yet here's me saying I can't live like this. That was definitely a reality check right there.
Yep.
So one tangent of this, in terms of this separation, focusing on the separation part, how people living in holistic fashion away from society. Excuse me. There was a book on this, right? The Benedict Option.
Oh yes, I read that Roger's book. Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, how much should we mix with others? So in the book, the good guys have their own faction, right? They have their own sort of compound. They're off the grid. They're relatively isolated, living a holistic life. Do all Catholics need to do this? Is this what we need to do to preserve our faith to some extent?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about the Benedict Option. I've read it, and Dreyer really wasn't saying that people need to geographically relocate. He was saying that if that becomes necessary, fine. What he was really talking about more was an attitude of withdrawing from the society around us and focusing on the gospel, which is very hard to do because there are clamors for attention through the internet and televisions and radios and all kinds of input stimulus trying to get our attention for a variety of reasons. And to disconnect from that and decide that, I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, you could live in an urban environment and disconnect from a lot of that stuff and try and attune yourself to the Lord. On the other hand, you could live in a rural environment, but if you got a dish network and 256 channels of television, you could be as plugged into the world's rhythm and thoughts and attitudes as anybody who lives in urban environment. So Dreyer's book, and I think this is a good one I've heard from many other people too, was not necessarily saying you need to physically remove yourself. It's saying you need to attitudinally remove yourself. Now, that being said, the way things are, it may become easier to change your attitude if you're physically removed. Now, in the book Watchful Sky, there's a real reason for why people are physically removed from the urban environments, because they're actually doing things which at that time are illegal, though they're not immoral. And so, there's a reason for them to be in hiding. But that doesn't necessarily, some other characters in the book were very faithful to the gospel, even though they lived in cities. So it's not a question of city versus country attitude.
Okay. Well, as you say, it's challenging. I've experienced this myself because, when you have secular friends and you have a real bond with them, there's a tendency to become like them. As St. Francis of Sales says, you become what you love. He said, if you love foolish women, you will become foolish. So that's a tremendous balancing act that I guess that we're required to do. Is we have to sort of love these people, and yet there's a certain disconnect. There's a certain you can't become them. You love them, but you cannot become them.
Well, you'll find this in the book of Proverbs in the Bible, where he repeatedly talks about the issue is that you have to be the stronger person in the sense that you have to be the one who's not influenced by the weaker people. And, that touches the heart of our personalities. And what are we anchored in? Are we anchored in Jesus, or are we anchored in what people think of us? And it's a struggle we all have, every one of us. But I think the solution to that isn't necessarily, it may get to the point. There may be a situation where, for a variety of reasons, you say, well, this particular friendship is harmful, it's dangerous, it's risky, I need to pull back or cut away. But the idea of just saying, well, you're not a believer, so I can't be a friend with you. That's not a good attitude. But the point is that you need to be the stronger person in your personality because you're anchored in Christ, as opposed to anchored in what other people think of you.
Yeah, again, it's tough because I feel like there's this impulse in everyone where there is a tremendous desire for unity. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of people, when it comes to friends and people who have a lot of zeal for the faith, I think it's difficult for them to not have that sort of unity with people who aren't aren't Catholic. You know,
Yeah.
so it is difficult. I totally can understand that. Um, let's touch on one other thing, because again, I say I could talk about this particular theme so much. The other, how big of a how important is it to live in this holistic fashion to get away from noise? To
You,
yeah,
well, in case you haven't read, Cardinal Sarah recently published a book, The Power of Silence, or something of that nature. And again, I haven't read anything by Cardinal Sarah. He's just fantastic. But he speaks a lot of that in the sense of the silence in our heart. But being the humans we are, it's theoretically possible for somebody who's tremendously devout to be able to be quiet in his heart on a subway at rush hour. That's theoretically possible. In actuality, a lot of us have trouble being silent in our hearts in the midst of a bunch of noise. I know I do. And so having a life where we've got periods of silence, I think that's something that we've lost quite a bit. That there's we don't have times of silence. If we're in the car, the radio's going. If we're at home, the television's on. There's
exactly.
always some.
It,
And in the Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis made the point that Screwtape, the demon, made the point that hell is the empire of noise. There's always noisy in hell, whereas heaven, it's either music or silence. And I think as moderns, a critical part that we can do right where we live, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, we can make room for silence in our lives to quiet our heart and hear the Holy Spirit.
yeah, absolutely. I did read. I don't know. I always say Cardinal Sarah lazily.
Yeah, I think
maybe
it's
Cardinal
Sarah.
Sarah.
Yeah,
but I read his other book, God or Nothing.
Fantastic book.
Yeah, so he touched on the silence thing a lot because he's big about that. I think in terms of contemplative meditation, just sort of, silent and being in silence. So he really got me onto that theme. Another person who got me onto that theme and thinking about this is Roger Scruton, who is sort of a Jordan Peterson-like guy. I think he's Anglican, and he always talks about the oppression of noise. Like elevator music, like you can't escape it. It's not even. It's just oppressive. My biggest pet peeve, that the thing that makes me sad, is when I see people walking or running and they have headphones on, because
Right.
it's such an opportunity. It's such a perfect opportunity for silence, but it also for silence. But it also shows me that they can't escape the noise. Like they need the noise. We can't just drive a car in silence. We have to have the radio on. We can't just walk. We have to be listening to the music. And I can't think of anything more perfect to block God out than that.
Yep.
He can't speak to you if you've got noise going into your ears the whole time. So okay, all right. Next topic. Young adult characters in the book are pulled in different directions by different forces. That's actually one place where I was really able to relate, because as a young adult in this world, you're sort of exploring different options, different things, but at the same time, these things are trying to reach out to you, for better or for ill. So Janice, one of the characters in your book, sort of, you've got, I don't know what adjective or label to describe the force, the evil force or the liberal force, or one force is reaching out to her, and she's so lonely. And see, here, another thing you touch on is we're all so lonely that we're looking for things. We're looking for
Yep.
fellowship to reach out. So people are willing to get into these undesirable organizations for the sake of fellowship. Now, fortunately, Derek, the other character, the other protagonist, goes in the other direction with the people off the grid, and so it's an
Yep.
interesting compare and contrast you do with these young people's journeys. But in any case, how do you feel Catholic communities should reach out to young adults?
Well, I mean, we unfortunately tend to often think in terms of programs and activities and that kind of thing, which are kind of administrative entities and administrative actions. In my experience, and this is somewhat reflected in the storyline involving Derek in Watchful Sky, what really touches people is families. And that's what people are really needing. They really want. And by family here, I mean beyond just the immediate nuclear family of mother and father and children. I mean, a broad family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, families that have been adopted into as families. Oh, you might as good as family to us. And what in my life experience, and also, imagination, obviously, but what has really got people, what really attracts them is the love of a family where they're simply accepted for who they are. Because again, back to this, our social tendencies toward a utilitarian view of people, where you're only valued for what you do. And when I go into work, I'm valued for how much computer code I can write. I mean, if I'm not writing, then they're going to have a talk with me about my presence. But with my family, I'm valued just for who I am, just because I'm, grandpa or dad or whoever it might be. And I think more than anything else, there's a hunger for family. And that's what Derek gets drawn into in one storyline in Watchful Sky. And in a way, Janice is kind of, she's captured because there's kind of this illusion of a family that's presented to her and dangled before her as saying, oh, you can belong here. You can be part of this. This is, you have a belonging, a place. And that's what kind of allures her until she learns the hard way that they aren't really interested in her. They're just interested in what she can do for them. And what she can do, of course, is pretty bad. So I think the critical thing, and the thing we need to recapture, is the role of families as centers of love, schools of love. This is all through church teaching. John Paul the Great was wonderful on this, how important the families are. They're schools of love.
Yeah, and so touching on the family thing, that's, it makes sense that both Janice and Derek are drawn to these different appeals of family, because their family life sucks. To pardon my language, but and the way you write it, to me, suggests a broader trend in society. Because Janice is in a real bad way, and she had one of the saddest phone calls I've ever encountered, where she's talking to her dad, and it's this strange dynamic where they're talking. They don't live together. Like he's in another state or something, I believe. And she doesn't want to imposition him, and he doesn't want to imposition her, and there's this distance there, and it's so sort of sad and pathetic that they don't. She wasn't treating him like a dad, and the dad wasn't treating her like a daughter. With love and care, and it's like, oh, we don't want to impose. Do you feel now, is that what you see as a broader trend that's happening right now in our society? Is the family being,
very much so.
Yeah.
The one of the goals of essentially the Romantic movement, and especially expressed through our culture, is complete atomic individualism. The idea that we're all just these individuals with our own wishes and our own decisions, our own lifestyles, and the worst thing you can do is impose on somebody else and be a cost to somebody else. And so Janice and her dad and their discussion, frankly, even Derek, before he gets involved in the family, detached individuals, no family connections, no sense of belonging. They just work and go home and do, play video games or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And there's complete detachment. Even when Janice feels like she might have something like a family with her friend, the roommate, well, that gets blown apart when the roommate gets other interests, and all of a sudden the whole relationship goes down the tubes. And it's that fragility and that temporary nature of everything. The idea that everything's disposable, relationships and that are all just transient, and that's held up as an ideal. That's promoted as being, well, you can live this way, and if you get enough earnings or enough investment income, you can be detached from everybody and just pay everybody for everything. And then we wonder why we're dying of loneliness in our culture.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the backdrop. I see that all over the place.
Yeah, gosh, it's funny. We have all these machines, to connect and socialize like never before. And yet I feel like mankind has never felt lonelier than before. It's quite a paradox.
What I really think there is I think there's this yearning for belonging. You see the medieval or something times, and the image presented, at least, is that everybody's got a place in society. You know who you are, and you know where you belong, and if they know anything about it, they know that families were integral. Society was essentially big families, and we've gotten to this point, and again, it's happened in just a few generations in the West here, that we've become so wealthy, really is what it is, because when you're wealthy enough, you don't need each other. You can buy whatever you need. And so we've become tremendously wealthy and enabling us to detach from each other. And so, because sometimes people are hard to get along with.
Yeah.
That G.K. Chesterton made the point about how if Englishmen really loved adventures, because somebody talked to him about how Englishmen must love adventures because they go on safaris to Kenya and trips to Canada and all that kind of thing. And he said, if they really love adventures, they'd stay at home and get along with their neighbors, because that's the real challenge. But the British Empire was the wealthiest one in the world at the time, and they could just afford to detach. And we're in that situation cubed. America is so wealthy that we really don't have to deal with anybody we don't want to deal with, but there's a cost for them.
Right. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. We long for, that's another thing we long for, that the internet is no substitute for, is this sort of closeness and interdependence. Like, I need meat. There's the butcher. Let's go to Tom the butcher. Then there's the carpenter. Then there's the blacksmith. You have this feeling of interdependence and closeness there that we don't have. And it's especially, honestly, it's especially rough in California, to be honest, because
I can imagine.
Yeah, there's a different. The culture in California, as I've observed, is very different from the rest of the United States, because people are more self-involved. They stick to themselves. If you're at the grocery market, you don't really even look at each other. You dare not strike up a conversation, really. If you strike up a conversation, you're probably from out of state or something. And it's always a delightful culture shock to me when I go to, perhaps, like in Pennsylvania, New York, Utah, where I find myself getting into conversations like at Walmart, in the grocery store line, and I think, wow, this is great. This is so great. And we don't have that in California. And I don't know. I wonder if Californians are happy with it like that. But it's a little tragic, to be honest, because I think deep down everybody does want more socialization and more friendliness, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I can't speak to California, though. I began my life there because my family lived in Sacramento and then moved back to Michigan while when I was in utero.
I
So
see.
I was, yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. Oh, yeah, one other thing, because we were talking about family before, and we were talking about the distance between the parents and families not really acting like families. I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory or not, but I have a suspicion that that's how the government wants it, because they want to be the ones to indoctrinate the kids through television, through public education. I see this in certain legislative actions where, like, they're making it tougher to homeschool your kids now. You need
Yep.
credentials. And just, I don't know. Is that crazy to think that the government doesn't want, sort of wants to separate the parents from their children? Is that crazy to think that, or is that reasonable to think that?
Yeah, a lot of writers, Russell Kirk for one, and several others, have made the point that when the state is in the ascendant, when they're gaining power, they don't want any rivals, and anything that comes between the individual and the state is a potential rival. The family is one of them, but there are others as well. Edward Burke used a term called little platoons, and Russell Kirk borrowed that. We're talking about ad hoc fraternities, guilds, just groups of people who get together, and Masons. I'm not advocating Masonry, but in America, Masons, Knights of Columbus, that kind of thing, which unfortunately are fading. Again,
Yeah.
partially due to this individualism that's been such a problem, but it's really true that, and you'll see this in totalitarian governments, that anything that stands between the government and the individual is a threat, and they will seek to eradicate it. And whether they do that explicitly or just kind of implicitly, because I doubt anybody's sitting in smoke-filled rooms in Washington trying to figure out how to destroy families.
Right.
The net effect can be the same, because if they say, well, we've got this program we want to advance, but we keep having these problems because parents keep objecting, then they're going to figure out something to do about the parents eventually.
Right.
You can find this in the teachings of John Dewey, who influenced a lot of our educational system. And his whole idea was essentially minimize the family until it just became a place where children ate and slept, and that was it. That the schools were the agents of the state in the complete formation of the children to be economic units and compliant voters. They just vote as they're told.
Right. Well, let's go in this direction a little bit more, because I like this little conspiracy theory stuff, and because I've been thinking about it. Charles Coulomb in Puritan's Empire seemed to suggest that was it Daniel Webster, one of the sort of founders of public education in America. He seemed to suggest that Webster's primary goal of public education was enculturation. Did I get that right? Basically make good Americans. It wasn't to actually learn. It wasn't to actually educate. It wasn't actually to think. It was to turn you into an American, and culturally. Would you agree with that? I mean, is that one of the the primary goals of the education system? Would you say is?
Well, I haven't gotten that far in Puritan's Empire just yet, but I've read some of it, and but whether or not Daniel Webster was into that, Charles would probably know more about that than I. Certainly, by the time John Dewey came along, that was very much the goal of saying, well, we're going to shape these students and form them and into being the kind of cultural participants that we want, and to have the kind of culture that we envision, which is a very different idea than the kingdom of God, which is what you find in scripture and church teaching, which is where the parents are in authority set over their children by God, and they're to form them in the ways of the kingdom, not of the world. And so in that sense, there's been a very serious contention between the kingdom and the world, at least in the West, for quite some time.
Okay, so here's another question about education, which I've been hypothesizing. To what extent do you think that the public education system is purposely not teaching children to critically think, so that they can be sort of programmed, sort of Brave New World style? Because I sort of see this. I see. I'm sure you do too, where you sort of see society being programmed. I remember I saw a bumper sticker a year ago. I'll never forget it. It said something like liberal Christianity, religion without the hate. So to me, I see that, and to me, society is being programmed so that they see the word values, Christian values, and they're immediately programmed to think hate. That's hate.
Mhm.
No more critical thinking, no more analysis. Christian values equals hate. So would you agree that there's sort of, we're sort of, the education system sort of neglectful in terms of critically thinking? Does the education system want to program like just little drones to think however
Well,
they want?
I think that again, whether you postulate that it might be people sitting in back rooms scheming to do this, there may be, I don't know, but whether there are or not, there's no question that the schools aren't about teaching critical thinking anymore. They're about programming, and because people who don't critically think can be easily moved and swayed by media and a lot of online influences these days. Nobody envisioned the internet back in John Dewey's day, but if they had, they probably would have salivated, because if you get to the point, look what's going on in the news right now. Very few people are thinking. Everybody's emoting.
Right.
Everybody's just responding, but on what they think. And the idea of critically sitting down and critically thinking about what's happening and what it should be happening in light of, for instance, our judicial tradition, it just isn't there anymore. People are, and what that does, unfortunately, an evangelical thinker named Francis Schaeffer predicted this, say 30, 40 years ago. He was saying that America is ripe for tyranny because we're jettisoning the foundations of our culture, which were biblical values. We're jettisoning critical thinking. We're jettisoning, the governmental basis, which is based on English and ultimately Roman law. And we're just becoming a people who feel. I remember a Thomas Sowell quote. He's a wonderful thinker, and he said, "It isn't that Johnny can't think; it's that he feels and he mistakes it for thinking." And
Okay.
that's a paraphrase, and the exact quote's much better. You can look it up.
Uh-huh.
But there's a lot to be said for the fact that we're the issue. I've had kids go through the educational system, and I know that they didn't get critical thinking skills there. They got them other places.
The smoking gun for me, in terms of an active, actively avoiding critical thinking, is a lack of philosophy classes.
Yep.
Both in college, and honestly, I think philosophy should be taught in high school. Personally,
Yeah.
I don't think it's that advanced. I think people should be introduced, and the fact that it isn't introduced, to me, that's suspect. That's big time suspect.
Right.
Why shouldn't it be introduced? And Joseph Piper. This is another big issue I'm on. Ever since I read Joseph Piper's "Leisure: The Basis of Culture."
Yes.
Did you read that?
That's one I haven't read, but a
one.
really excellent one, if you get a chance to read it, is Abusive Language, Abusive Power.
We saw that in our bookstore. It's on my to-read.
Pick that one up. It's a thin volume, but if you read that, you'll understand what's going on in our world around us, as there's been a total detachment of words from truth. That's what he's pointing out. But it gets to the point of propaganda or flattery, to use the older term, where words are just used to get what I immediately want or to advance my agenda. And
wow.
that's the position of the sophists. And whereas Pieper points out, our speech is an aspect of our image of God, and it's intended to lead us and others to truth. And that's every word we speak should be in some way or the other leading people to truth, even if it's just a casual conversation with somebody else.
Yeah.
If you and I were to sit down over a beer or cider, because I'm not a beer drinker, and just talk about stuff, whatever, we'd nonetheless be drawing each other closer to the truth about ourselves. You'd get to know me better, and I get to know you. And that's what the tongue is for. That's what speech is for. So, and Pieper brings this out in this book. It's an excellent book. Abuse of Language, Abuse and Power. Can't recommend it too highly.
All right. Yeah. So, okay. So, yeah. What was I? What was? Sorry, I got lost. Oh, yeah. Philosophy. How philosophy is so important. The act of engaging in philosophy, the act of thinking, is very important on an individual and societal basis. Because in philosophy, what are you doing? You're wondering about the world. You're breaking out of your little box, and you're wondering about the world. Yep. And that's something that, to me, is being discouraged. We don't wonder about the world. We like our little box. We get our vocational training, right? Whether you're an electrician or some technical skill or whatever, economics, and then you do your job. You have your Puritan work ethic. You work for the sake of work and maybe nice vacation time, and then have a few fun moments in life, and that's it. That's it. Yep. They don't want you to philosophy. They don't want you to break out of your little box.
Right.
And I've always had, again, another hypothesis of mine is that atheism is only possible if a person has a complete and utter disdain of philosophy. Because atheist metaphysics simply doesn't hold up. There is no legitimate atheist metaphysics. It doesn't make sense. Nope. You have to somehow believe that something can come from nothing, which breaks your own laws of science. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. So I don't know how that, but I guess that doesn't bother them, these absurd contradictions in their belief systems.
They just don't think about it. So it's that you just toss off a few catchphrases and a few slogans, and then go watch your television. It's like you don't need to think about it. I mean, you're right. If there were a conspiracy to make a nice conformist populace, the very first class that would get eliminated would be philosophy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because, and it's hard work to think about how you think about why you think about things like consciousness. What is this consciousness? As opposed to just taking them for granted and never questioning them.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much, and to me, it's such an antidote to so many things, to so many ugly, horrible things, and yet I'd love to hear someone explain the reason why, other than, it's too hard. Thinking is so hard.
Well, I'll tell you, part of the reason is that the people these days want you to not think about philosophy because they just want you to assume it. Materialistic rationalism, the idea that only that which can be known and only that which can be tangibly touched is the only reality. It's not like that's ever specifically taught. It's just assumed.
Right.
And so that's the only philosophy people pick up. I read this interesting article recently about why a bunch of millennials, younger people, are saying they don't believe in God anymore. And this list of, I'm too well educated. I'm not stupid. I'm a rational being. I can't believe in God. And I was thinking, these people couldn't make it through a single page of Aquinas.
I know, but it's the programming. See, dumb, stupid Christians don't know nothing. I don't want to be dumb and stupid, so I'm not going to be. See, that's programming right there. That's perfect societal programming in action.
That's right. It is. So one of the things we do is prove that. Again, I think we're moving into times where it's not so much going to be that we're going to be able to out-argue people. And I don't know, not many people have argued into the kingdom of God. There have been a few people.
Right.
But not many people have actually been argued in.
Right.
Especially these days, when the mental rigor is getting softer and softer and softer, and there's no holding place for like your C.S. Lewis arguments. But what again? This ties back to what are we really hungry for? We're really hungry for love. That's what we want,
Yeah.
and a deep love, an abiding love that transcends. I mean, societal definition tries to work it. Say love means sex. That's it. So you take it so love. No, that's not the love that we're hungry for. We're hungry for married love, but we're also hungry for family love. And when we offer that to people, when we are willing to be families to them, then they can start to see, well, maybe these people aren't so stupid after all. Maybe they got answers to questions that, the evening news or, the television can't provide.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you hit. That's one of my big. Gosh, that's another thing that I think is so important for evangelization that us faithful Catholics need to be mindful of. Is to just be nice people. Like when we present the faith, do it nice. I mean, you're a salesman. What's how successful is just this prideful, snobbish salesman going to be? He's not going to be very very successful, is he? He's not going to do much business. Rule number one when it comes to persuading someone is they have to like you. You have to be a
Yep.
nice person. And so I think that's right at the front of the list in terms of what you need to do to evangelize. So, okay. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I think it's easy to fall into thinking of evangelization as kind of a program or a process that we do.
Oh, right. Yeah.
What it really is loving, and I know this is something that I struggle with, and Holy Spirit's been talking to me about it. Was that it's easy for me to treat people in the same utilitarian way that I deplore it in the culture, but then I'll turn around and deal with somebody in a utilitarian way. How much good is this person to me? And if I really had the heart of Christ, every person I'd see, I'd meet, I'd see His image in them, and so to really evangelize again, just because I was talking about the new evangelization has always been something for the churches engaged in, but it needs to rise out of love. And where we've seen successful evangelists like St. Francis, it wasn't that he set out with a program to evangelize Europe. It's he set out to love the next person he met. That's what he did. He's going to love the next person he met. And again, our culture, California's an extreme example, but you touch on a good one. It's like people want to avoid each other. It's almost like a social stigma against getting involved with somebody.
Right.
And how to love. That's a tough one. That's a tough question. How do we love people? And I think it gets back to, in the human economy, back to that family question. How do we be a family?
Yeah.
My grandkids don't have any trouble loving me, and I don't have any trouble loving them. And we have friends of ours who we've kind of adopted as family members, and we don't, not actually legally, but de facto, they're other families are kind of like, they're as good as our children. And so we love them too. And it's not for anything, it's just because they are.
Okay, so let's go back to probably one of the most prominent themes in the book, which is the culture of life versus the culture of death.
Yep.
More specifically, when it comes to the culture of death, it's the premature killing of sick people.
Yes.
Who are regarded as, they're draining society. They're just dragging us all down. They're not getting better. They're suffering. Their quality of life isn't that great. Isn't it better?
They're
for everyone
expensive.
I've seen people on C-SPAN. I've seen specialists go up in front and explain how 2/3 of healthcare costs are on end of life issues. Sort of wink, wink. You know what I mean? We'd solve a lot of problems if we just removed the end of life care. We could fix everything. They didn't go so far, but it's right there. Thank goodness. Thank goodness, old people, or senior citizens are so notorious for voting in large droves. Because
Yes.
if you guys
Well,
weren't, you guys would be done. You guys would be done for.
well, I mean, there's no guarantees on that either.
Yeah,
That's a
that's
theme that
true.
works its way through this book and Wounded Land, the third book in the series, is the issue of, well, they're expensive, they're inconvenient, they need to be. We need to do something about this problem, and anybody who thinks that it isn't coming along needs to just look at Europe, where they're already starting to euthanize people for more and more reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So we market this book as dystopian, and rightfully so. I mean, there's a lot of problems, but we're finding that a lot of these trends they're happening now, and especially some of these things are pretty over the top. To be honest, on your Facebook page, you linked a headline. Headline says Gosport Hospital responsible for practice of lethal opiate prescribing, which may have killed up to 650 patients at NHS hospital, inquiry finds. I'm going to read just a little bit of these findings because they're pretty egregious and they're sort of, honestly, they're splashing cold water on everyone's face in terms of this area. So I'm just going to read so everyone knows about
okay.
this, what's happening. 650 patients died from lethal doses of opiate painkillers given, quote, without medical justification. Conclusions by the panel. There was a disregard for human life and a culture of shortening lives of a large number of patients. There was an institutionalized regime of prescribing and administering dangerous doses of a hazardous combination of medication not clinically indicated or justified with patients.
Yeah, that it's almost a frightening thing. My wife comments on this, that when I wrote these books, I wrote Watchful Sky in 2013 and have been written the other 4 since then. I was kind of looking about a generation out, about 20 years.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, even before the books are published, things start coming out about how this is unfolding in our world right now. So it's dystopian in a sense, but in a way, I mean, I've had people read it and go, well, this is happening all around us. I went, well, yeah, I guess I misjudged how far off this was. Because, I mean, Britain, for example, the National Institute of Health, I mean, they've got socialized medicine. And so there's a strong incentive for them to do away with these expensive people who are a real drag on the budget. And so how far are we from that?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you have any personal encounters with sort of this going on. Charles Coulomb, he's told me, when it came to his mom, who needed a feeding tube intravenously, and they wanted to take her off. They wanted to starve her. They wanted, and the doctor apparently said, okay, sign this DNR, because if you, so sign this DNR, so that means, we can take her off the intravenous and we can starve her to death. And, Charles said, okay, put that in writing that the DNR actually says that, and then I'll sign it. And the doctor wouldn't do it then because he knew the DNR didn't mean that. But basically, from as Charles says it, I mean, you have to go to war with these doctors. You actually have to fight for, the hospital to not kill off your loved one. So it seems like this is going to be an ongoing thing. Like, please don't kill, my dad or my grandma or grandpa. So this is, I don't know what we're going to do in this area. It's pretty scary, to be honest.
Well, I think that's another one of the factors in our culture that is going to drive people away, drive people to do that kind of off the grid thing, like you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
That as it becomes increasingly true that, when you entrust yourself to the medical establishment, you're getting their ethics and their morals and their practices, and they're going to be people who say, look, I can't. In fact, that's a major theme of the Watchful Sky series, is that these people say, well, if I go into the system, I'm going to get killed. So I'm going to have to step out of it, even if that means a lower standard of care, but at least I'll be loved, and as opposed to being put to death.
Yeah. Um, One of the things I've said for a long time, in kind of a related thing, is the whole issue of people seeing humans as animals, as just
Yep.
another animal, albeit an advanced one. So you got to be careful with that,
Yep.
because if you see yourself as animals, sooner than you know it, the government's going to treat you like animals. And when Old Yeller's sick, time to put him down. Time to put him down for his
Yep.
own
That's
good.
right.
And so, I mean, that's what we want, right? I guess we're animals, and this is what you do with animals, right? I mean, we're just commodities, and when we outlived our economic usefulness, we don't like suffering, right? So it's terrible to avoid suffering and quality of life. I mean, you can't. I mean, the person's bedridden, so and he can't go to Hawaii or anywhere. So I mean, that's not even worth living, right?
Yep. That's really that's where the logical end game of a rationalistic materialistic idea. I mean, if we are sophisticated, if the only thing which sets us apart is reason, well, what happens when you have an advanced Alzheimer's patient who's lost their reason?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you? Well, that the logical follow on to that is to say, well, you'd put that person down in the
Yeah.
same way you'd put an animal that lost its capacity. Only the idea of the image of God stands between us humans and that philosophy. And where the image of God has been eliminated, that's exactly what's happened, is mass executions.
Yeah, I was just watching something on EWTN. I was watching Dale Ahlquist in his he's a GK Chesterton
Oh, yeah.
aficionado, and he did a great job. And he's what you just said reminded me of something I think GK Chesterton said. When you remove God, you also when you remove God from the picture, you also remove humanity from the picture, because we are
Yeah.
the image of God. And so
That's right.
if you don't love God, then you don't love humanity, and that's sort of we see that happening.
Yep. That's right.
So okay, well we're almost done here. You're pretty outspoken on Twitter. You tweet a lot. In one of my favorite tweets of yours, you say, "quote When we Catholics don't live our faith robustly, we're accused of being tepid hypocrites. When we do, we're accused of being religious fanatics. The only thing this makes clear is who we shouldn't be trying to please." Do you think do you think we Catholics are in general are too accommodating? Do you try to please secular society too much, or are we too politically correct for the sake of fitting in?
Well, it's hard to live in a culture and not be influenced by it, because the people around us are presenting themselves to our senses. They're what we attend to, and that's one reason why it's so important to immerse ourselves in the scriptures and in the teachings of the church and the saints, and to have ourselves oriented to the Lord. Because when we are always worrying about how many likes we're getting on our post or whatever it might be, how people are going to respond to us, then we're going to be influenced by the people around us and their values.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, if you want to go back to somebody who's good at this, pick up anything by Cardinal Sarah, because he's somebody who's immersed himself in the words of the Lord and the ways of the Lord. And the more you do that, the less prone you are to get influenced by the world.
Yeah, his critique of the Western world is certainly you can tell he's not influenced in any way by the Western world. That's for sure. He says I mean, my favorite line from him, which is dead on, is he says there is a silent apostasy in the Western world. Life is structured in the Western world as if God does not exist.
Yep.
Like, wow. Like, that's
Yep.
100% correct. Like, I didn't know that was correct until he said that. And then, but
Yep.
once you read that, it's like, wow, yeah, actually, that's correct. Whew.
Yep.
So, if any in the audience would like to follow Roger, I'll try to put his Twitter handle on the screen. It's RBF Thomas. Okay, we're going to close this interview with an amazing blurb that you received for Under the Watchful Sky by Dr. Brad Berzer of Hillsdale College. He says, quote, "This is by far the best Catholic novel written since Michael O'Brien published Father Elijah 20 years ago. This is an absolute page-turner, gripping the reader from beginning to end. Combine the intelligence of early Tom Clancy with the wit of Flannery O'Connor and the symbolism of Tolkien. There are Tolkien references throughout the book. And you'll come close to Roger Thomas. I was upset when I finished this, as I wanted to read the second in the series now. I tell you, I've been a publisher for a long while, and I don't think I've ever encountered a blurb as good as that one. That's probably the best blurb I've ever seen for any book ever.
Well, yeah, Brad's great that way. He really enjoyed it. I had sent him a copy for his evaluation, so he's a great guy, but he's a keen critic too. So I'm glad that he. I mean, it was an accolade there, but he isn't ashamed of cutting when he needs to.
Yeah, right. So he's not just a rubber stamp or whatever. Like, this is a great novel. He's hard to impress. You're saying. Yep.
But and don't forget, there's another one out there, From Afar.
From Afar, absolutely. You beat me to it. We're gonna have to do this again because From Afar, I have this right here. We published this last Christmas season, and I'm not a historical fiction guy, and I actually was pretty skeptical. And then I read From Afar, and I was absolutely dazzled. It was unbelievable what you did with that book. I mean, I got teary in sections at the end, at the climactic part. It was I think everybody should read it. So I can't wait to do an interview on this one and talk to you about all the aspects of that one, because there's definitely a lot to talk about for that book as well. So any closing words? Anything before we're done here?
Nope. Just hope people get a chance. A common comment, one of the most common things people say about Watchful Sky, is they have trouble putting it down. Once they start it, they have a very difficult time putting it down. So if you like books that do that, by all means, try Watchful Sky, even if you don't think it's quite your style, because it's a page turner.
Oh, that goes with that. I mean, both Under the Watchful Sky and From Afar, I think when I got into it, I finished it in 2 days, and sort of like all non-vital life activities sort of had to be put on hold. Like if there was stuff, kind of like a couple of chores I needed to do. Sorry, I mean it's on hold. I'm reading Roger Thomas's book right now, and I need to finish this, and then I can get on with the rest of my life. That was my experience with your book.
Well, apparently it's a pretty common one.
Yeah. So,
and then hopefully the second book, Rising Darkness, in the series, which you have yet to publish, but
right,
it gets a little darker, but the light gets brighter.
That's always how it is. It is. So everyone buy Watchful Sky and From Afar. We do still have actually a couple signed copies from Roger Thomas. We have 2 signed copies left in our inventory. So, first come, first serve. I mean, whoever buys first gets those signed copies. We also have we put on our website for the book page. We put the first chapter of for both books. The first chapter on our website for the first chapter of Under the Watchful Sky. I guarantee you, if you read it, you're going to have to buy the book. So, if you have a lot of stuff going on in your life, if you're really busy right now, whatever you do not visit that page and do not read, because you're going to be in a quandary then. You're going to be in a rough way, okay? Only read that if you have some time, because you're going to be wanting to finish off the rest of the book. I guarantee it. Okay, so it was nice. It was great. We had a fun conversation, I think, today, Roger. It was fun to have you. We're gonna have to do this again From Afar. So I would assume we'll do it in perhaps maybe a month or 2.
Right? Yeah, we can make the arrangements.
All right, that's it for now, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblar House here with author Roger Thomas, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.